Here are all of the topics covered in the US pressure groups revision video. This video will focus on the methods used by pressure groups, looking exclusively at direct action. Due to the way that US government operates, there are many different areas for pressure groups to access, and therefore have some degree of influence. There are 50 state governments and legislators, in addition to federal government along with Congress and the Supreme Court. Pressure groups can choose to work at either state or local level, as well as both. They may also choose to target the executive, the legislative, or the judiciary branch, or all three. In order to do this, pressure groups wield a wide range of different methods to try and influence decision making. A final method used by US pressure groups is direct action. Direct action refers to any method used by a pressure group that goes beyond the standard constitutional methods of campaigning. The aim is to put public pressure on the executive to force concessions, whereas conventional constitutional methods such as petitions and letter writing campaigns aim to persuade the executive or the legislative to adopt the pressure group's agenda. Many US pressure groups have used direct action, including the following. In the 1950s and 1960s, the civil rights movement adopted non-violent protests. African American protesters used sit-ins in segregated white-only areas and bus boycotts to put pressure on bus companies to desegregate their buses. In 1963, 250,000 people attended the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The effectiveness of direct action has been much debated. It certainly generates publicity and media attention, but many alienate policymakers or the public. This is particularly the case if direct action is violent, so most groups restrict themselves to non-violent civil disobedience. Leaders cannot always prevent their calls from being linked to violence, as mass mobilizations can spiral out of control. Since 2013, Black Lives Matter has organised huge demonstrations and street protests against systematic racism and the police killings of Black people. The 2020 murder of George Floyd, an African American, by a white police officer who knelt on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, led protesters to defy the risks of contracting COVID-19 to join large demonstrations in at least 140 cities across the US. Some were peaceful, while others were marred by rioting, looting, arson, and violence against the police. Let's look at a case study of direct action. We're going to look at the March on Washington. In 1963, African Americans were facing unemployment and poverty on a large scale. It led to the idea of marches for jobs and freedom. In 1962 and 1963, there were hundreds of marches and demonstrations. The most important of them was planned for August 1963, where almost 250,000 marched on Washington, D.C. This march was highly effective at bringing civil rights to the public's attention because of the amount of people that participated and due to its symbolic location. The marchers met at the Washington Monument before dawn. They then marched to the Lincoln Memorial to symbolize the importance of the president who had ended slavery. This is where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. This march was highly important. Afterwards, the US President John F. Kennedy decided to meet with the leaders of the civil rights movement. This showed that the circumstances surrounding Black Americans was going to change. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was then passed by President Johnson. This outlawed segregation in schools, public places, and employment, and set up the Equal Opportunities Commission to enforce this. Martin Luther King later won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for his work.